With little sign that Democrats and Republicans will reach a deal anytime soon, the U.S. government is now at risk of running out of money to pay its bills. For more, let's go over to Anand in our Washington News Center. And Anand, just a few days ago, it was unthinkable. Now more and more people are talking about the prospect of a default.
That's right, Kida. The U.S. Treasury estimates that by next week there is a very real risk of a default on the nation's debt. And the U.S. already runs a real risk of being downgraded by the major credit rating agencies. So let's take a look at how the U.S. arrived at this situation. In May, the U.S. Treasury formed a package of extraordinary funding measures worth $232 billion to help pay the government's bills, while politicians work towards a lasting deal on the country's debt ceiling. But that money will run out on August 3rd by the Treasury's estimation. On that date, the U.S. would not be able to service all its debts. But some economic analysts say that the U.S. government may have a little more breathing space. For example, the Bipartisan Policy Center think tank says that the U.S. may not run out of money to pay all its debts until August 10th. Now, earlier I spoke to Pat Garofalo, the economic policy editor at the Center for American Progress Action Fund, a progressive think tank. I asked him what impact a government funding squeeze could have on individual U.S. states.
Well, the first way it would affect states is that they're going to see their federal dollars potentially disappear overnight. States get a lot of money from the federal government to do various things, healthcare programs, education. And so that money could very well disappear if the Treasury isn't able to pay all its bills. There are actually 5 states in particular. They're Maryland, Virginia, Tennessee, New Mexico, and South Carolina, who are AAA rated right now in terms of their creditworthiness. But if they lose their federal revenue, we'll actually see their credit downgraded because they're so dependent on money from the government.
Now, give us some idea of where this money is spent. In other words, how would it affect people right at the coalface?
Well, what happens is that money from the federal government supports all kinds of state programs. A lot of federal government programs are actually administered by states, something like unemployment insurance. Medicaid is a huge program that's administered by the states. And there are various other small things, housing vouchers, basically anything that has to do with healthcare, low-income education is actually a big priority of the federal government that is run through the states. So those are the sorts of things, because we don't know which bills are going to be able to get paid and which are going to have to go by the wayside. The states could just see their money dry up and disappear.
The irony of what you're saying when you mention those states that are the most vulnerable is that many of them have very strong Republican support.
They do. There's actually a funny little story involving the Republican governor of Virginia, Bob McDonnell. A few months ago, he was trying to toe the Tea Party line and said if Republicans don't get everything they want out of this package, then he sees no reason to raise the debt ceiling. But when he found out that the credit rating agencies were going to downgrade his state if the debt ceiling didn't go up, he came out, held a press conference, and called for the debt ceiling to be raised immediately.
Now, what can states do to soften the blow, so to speak?
They can't do very much at all. Most states already have balanced budget amendments, so they've already had to cut back significantly just to balance their budgets for this fiscal year. You've seen something like 38 states cut healthcare, education, programs for the poor. And if they suddenly see their federal money disappear, which most of them were counting on, there's really nothing they can do except hang on and hope that something happens.
If the federal government runs short of money to pay all its bills, it can pay some of its bills, but then it has to prioritize what it's going to pay. The Treasury Secretary, Timothy Geithner, has been talking about prioritizing. We're going to pay this guy, we're not going to pay that guy. How is he going to do that? How does he make that decision on the one hand? And on the other hand, does he have the power to do that, to say, I'm going to pay you and not you?
The second question is actually kind of an open question. Most legal analysts and economists agree that he can, in fact, prioritize payments and decide to not pay some bills that cross his desk. But that is not a universal opinion. There is a line of thinking that he has to pay things in the order in which they are due, which, if Social Security checks come after something, could be a big problem. No one really knows how he prioritizes payments because it's never happened before. The federal government has never found itself in this situation where the Treasury Secretary ends up having to choose between unemployment benefits, Social Security benefits, and veterans benefits, and maybe he can only pay 2 out of the 3 that day.